My Amish parents gave away my baby, and for 38 years I believed I knew why. I believed it was shame. I believed it was sin. I believed my own father looked at me the way you look at something broken, something you cannot fix. And so he did what he thought was right. And he never once let me hold my own daughter before they took her from my arms. That is what I believed for 38 years. And then, in the spring of my 71st year, I found a box of letters in the bottom of an old cedar chest, and everything I thought I knew about that terrible day came apart in my hands like wet paper. What I found in that box was not shame. It was not sin. It was something far stranger and far sadder. And by the time I am finished telling you this story, I think you will understand why I have never told it to another living soul until now. Before I go any further, I want to ask you for something, and I do not ask for things easily, because I was not raised to ask. I was raised to give, to serve, to keep my head down and my hands busy and my mouth shut. But I am an old woman now, and I have decided that some rules are meant to be broken. So here is what I am asking. If this story moves you even a little, press that like button before you go any further, because it helps other people find this video, and I think this is a story that needs finding. And if you would stay with me a while, if you would like to hear more of an old woman's memories, press subscribe, because I have more to tell you, more than just this one story, and I would be glad of the company. And then, before you even hear the end of what I have to say, I want you to write in the comments where in this wide world you are watching from. I have lived my whole life in one small corner of Pennsylvania, and I would love to know, before I close my eyes tonight, that people from every corner of the earth heard an old Amish woman tell the truth at last. So tell me where you are. And then settle in, because this is going to take a while, and I am going to tell it slow, the way my own grandmother used to tell stories to me on the porch when the fireflies came out over the cornfields. My name does not matter much for this story, so I will just tell you to call me what my grandchildren call me now, which is Memmy. That is the word we use for grandmother. I was born in the autumn of 1955, on a farm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, the fourth of what would eventually be 9 children, in a house with no electricity and no telephone, and no photographs of any of us, because photographs were vanity, and vanity was a sin we were taught to fear the way other children fear the dark. My father's name was Eli, and he was a stern man, though not a cruel one, not in the way the world sometimes imagines Amish fathers to be. He worked from the black of before dawn to the black of after dusk, and his hands were so rough from the plow and the harness leather that when he touched my hair as a small girl, it felt like being touched by tree bark. Gentle tree bark. But tree bark all the same. My mother's name was Sarah, and she was a small woman, quiet, quick with her hands at the quilting frame, and she had a way of humming hymns under her breath while she worked that I did not fully appreciate until I was old myself, and found myself humming the very same tunes without meaning to. We lived the way our people had lived for 200 years before us, and the way many of our people still live today, though the world outside our fences was changing faster than any of us understood. We did not have cars. We had buggies. We did not have electric lights. We had oil lamps that hissed softly in the evenings and threw long shadows across the kitchen walls. We did not have televisions or radios or any of the things that fill up a child's mind in your world. And so instead, our minds were filled with the Bible, with the Orsbund hymnal, with the rhythms of planting and harvest, with the long silent hour of Sunday preaching, and with each other. I want you to understand something before I go further into this story, because I think it is important, and it is something the world often gets wrong about us. We were not unhappy. I do not say that to defend what happened to me, because what happened to me was a wound that has never fully closed, not even now. Not even after 38 years, and a box of letters that answered every question and somehow left me with 100 new ones. But I do not want you to think I am about to tell you a story about how terrible it is to be Amish, because that is not true, and it would not be honest, and if there is one thing I have left in this world, it is my honesty. I loved my childhood. I loved the smell of my mother's bread on Saturday mornings. I loved the sound of my father's voice leading the horses in from the far pasture. I loved my brothers and sisters, all 8 of them, even the ones who tried my patience, which in a family of 9 children is most of them, most days. I loved being Amish. I still am Amish, in my bones, in my hands, in the prayers I say before I sleep. This is not a story about leaving my faith behind. This is a story about a wound that my faith, as I understood it then, did nothing to heal, and about a truth that took 38 years to surface, and about what I did once I finally understood it. I was the kind of girl the older women called too curious for her own good. I asked questions in a community that did not always welcome questions, not because the answers were forbidden, but because asking itself was seen as a kind of restlessness, a kind of dissatisfaction with the order that God and the church had set down for us. I remember once, I could not have been more than 8 years old, I asked my grandmother, my own Memmy, why the birds could fly over the fence at the edge of our property and go wherever they pleased, and we could not. She did not answer me with words. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she went back to her quilting, and I understood, even at 8 years old, that I had asked something I was not supposed to ask, though I could not have told you why. That curiosity never left me. It got me into trouble more times than I can count over the years, and it is, in a strange roundabout way, part of the reason I am sitting here telling you this story at all, because it was that same curiosity, that same refusal to simply accept the answer I had been given, that sent me digging through an old cedar chest in the spring of my 71st year, looking for something I did not even know I was looking for. By the time I was 16, I was, if I am honest with you, and I promised you I would be honest, a very pretty girl. I do not say that with pride, because pride was another one of those sins we were taught to guard against with almost as much vigilance as we guarded against vanity. But I say it because it matters to the story, and because an old woman telling a story on the internet has earned the right to tell a little bit of the truth about herself. I had hair the color of a chestnut horse, thick and long, though of course it was always pinned up and covered, and I had my mother's small, quick hands and my father's steady dark eyes, and more than one boy in our church district found reasons to walk near our farm on a Sunday afternoon, hoping to catch a glimpse of me hanging wash on the line. I tell you this not to boast, but because it is the beginning of everything that happened afterward. And I do not think you can understand the rest of this story without understanding that I was, at 16, a girl who was noticed, and who, in her own quiet way, rather liked being noticed, though I would have died of embarrassment if anyone had ever said so out loud. Every year when a young person in our community turned 16, they entered what we called Room Springer, which means roughly the running around years. It is a word that has been misunderstood by the outside world more than almost any other word associated with us. People imagine wild parties, cars, drinking, all manner of worldly indulgence, and I will not pretend that none of that happens, because for some young people it does. But for most of us, Rumspringa was a quieter thing. It was simply the years between childhood and baptism, the years in which we were given a little more freedom to decide, on our own, whether we wanted to commit to the church for the rest of our lives. Some young people used those years to go a little wild, to buy a radio, to wear English clothes in secret, to go to a movie theater in town with their heart pounding the whole time. Others barely used the freedom at all, and simply waited for the day they could be baptized and settle into the life they had always known. I fell somewhere in between, but I want to be honest with you, because that is what I promised, and the honest truth is that my Rumspringa was the beginning of the two great loves of my life, and also the beginning of the two great sorrows of my life. And to this day I could not tell you where the line between the love and the sorrow actually sits, because they grew up so tangled together in my heart that I have never quite been able to separate the roots. His name was Daniel. He was not Amish. He was what we called English, which is simply our word for anyone who is not us, anyone from the world outside our fences, regardless of where their family actually came from. Daniel's family had a farm that bordered ours on the eastern side, separated only by a line of old sugar maples and a small creek that froze over most winters thick enough to walk on, though we were forbidden from walking on it, which of course meant that every child in both families walked on it at some point or another when no one was looking. I had known Daniel my whole life the way you know a neighbor, which is to say I had seen him across fences and across fields more times than I could count, but I had never really known him, not until the summer I turned 17. That summer, his family's dog, an old golden retriever named Buster, who had gone half-blind and entirely deaf, wandered onto our property and got himself tangled in the wire fencing along the north pasture, and I was the one who found him, whimpering and thrashing in a way that made my heart break a little, because even a wandering dog does not deserve to suffer like that. I worked him loose as gently as I could, and by the time Daniel came running across the field, having heard from his younger sister that Buster had gone missing, I had already carried the old dog most of the way home in my own arms, my apron streaked with mud and dog hair, my cap knocked half sideways from the effort. Daniel stopped in the middle of the field when he saw me coming, this strange Amish girl carrying his family's dog like a baby, and he started to laugh. Not a mean laugh, but a warm, surprised, delighted sort of laugh, and I remember feeling my whole face go hot, and I remember thinking, even then, even in that very first moment, that I had never in my life heard a sound quite like that laugh, and that I wanted, more than almost anything, to hear it again. What followed over that summer and the next was not the kind of dramatic, forbidden romance you might be picturing, at least not at first. It began slowly, the way most real things do. He would find reasons to be near the fence line when I was hanging wash. I would find reasons to walk the long way to the mailbox past the sugar maples at the hour I knew he was usually finishing his chores. We talked about small things at first. Horses, the weather, the strange English machines he was learning to fix in his father's shop. He was curious about my world in a way that never felt mocking or condescending, the way some English people can be when they encounter us, treating us like a museum exhibit instead of like people. Daniel never made me feel that way. He asked genuine questions, and he listened to the answers. And slowly, over the better part of 2 years, without either of us ever quite naming what was happening, we fell in love. I know what some of you are thinking, and I do not blame you for thinking it. You are thinking, an Amish girl and an English boy, this can only end one way, and it will not be a happy way. And you are not entirely wrong. But I want you to understand that at the time, in the middle of it, it did not feel like a tragedy unfolding. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. Daniel had a way of looking at me like I was the only interesting thing in the entire county, and I had never in my life been looked at that way. Not by my father, who loved me but showed it mostly through work and provision. Not by the boys in my own church district, who were kind enough, but who looked at me the way you look at a good milking cow. Useful, pleasant, unremarkable. Daniel looked at me like I was a mystery worth solving, and I have to tell you, at 17, at 18, there is almost nothing more intoxicating than being looked at that way. We were careful, or at least we thought we were careful, for a long time. We met at the fence line, and then, as we grew bolder, we met a little further from the fence line, in the old sugar shack that sat abandoned on the boundary between our two families' land, unused since the last of the sugaring seasons a decade before. It was there, in that little wooden shack that smelled of old sap and dust and sunlight coming through the gaps in the boards, that Daniel first kissed me, in the autumn of my 18th year. And it was there, over the following months, that our relationship became something I could not have explained to my parents even if I had wanted to, which I did not, because I already knew somewhere deep down that what we were doing would break their hearts and possibly break me from my entire community if it were ever discovered. I was baptized into the church that same autumn, which I know sounds strange given everything I have just told you, but I want to explain why, because I think it matters. I was baptized because I believed, truly and fully, in the faith I had been raised in. My love for Daniel did not feel at the time like a rejection of that faith. It felt like a separate room in my heart, a room I had not yet figured out how to reconcile with the rest of the house, but a room I was not ready to tear down either. I told myself, the way young people in love often tell themselves things, that I would find a way to make it work. I told myself that Daniel would join the church, though I never once asked him if he wanted to, because I think some small, frightened part of me already knew what his answer would be. I told myself that love conquers all, which is a lovely thing to believe when you are 20 years old and have never yet watched love lose a single battle against the harder realities of life. I was baptized in the spring, and I discovered I was pregnant in the early summer of the same year, just 2 months later, and I want to tell you, because I promised you honesty, that discovering it did not feel like the beginning of a nightmare. Not at first. For about 4 days, it felt like the beginning of something else entirely. I lay awake at night with my hand pressed flat against my own stomach, and I let myself imagine, foolishly, wonderfully, that somehow this would be the thing that changed everything, that somehow a baby would be the bridge between my two worlds instead of the wall that it eventually became. I was 20 years old, freshly baptized into a faith that considered what I had done, and what I now carried inside me, one of the gravest sins a young woman in our community could commit, and I spent 4 days dreaming about names. It was my mother who first noticed. Mothers always notice, I think, long before anyone says a word, and I have come to believe that some part of her had suspected something was happening between Daniel and me for a long time before that summer, though she had said nothing, hoping perhaps that it was only a passing foolishness that would burn itself out the way most young infatuations do. But a mother who has carried 9 children of her own knows the particular way a young woman's body begins to change, knows the particular tiredness that settles into a daughter's eyes, knows the particular way a young woman's hand strays without thinking to the soft place below her waist. She said nothing to me directly at first. She simply began watching me, and I felt that watching the way you feel a storm building on a still, humid afternoon, long before the first thunder ever sounds. The confrontation, when it came, happened on a Tuesday evening in late July, and I remember the date because it was my younger sister's birthday. And there had been a small cake, and we had all been sitting around the kitchen table in the lamplight, and my mother had waited until my younger siblings were sent up to bed before she looked across the table at me and asked, in a voice so quiet I almost did not hear it over the sound of the crickets outside the window, whether I was carrying a child. I did not answer her right away. I could not. I simply looked at her, and I think my face must have answered for me, because she closed her eyes for a long moment, the way you close your eyes against a bright light, and when she opened them again, there were tears standing in them, though she did not let them fall. Not in front of me. Not that night. My father was told the following morning, and I want to tell you about my father's reaction, because it is important, and because it does not match the picture some of you may already be painting in your minds of an enraged, unforgiving Amish patriarch. My father did not shout. He did not strike me, though I think some part of me almost wished he would, because a slap would have been over in a moment, and what actually happened was so much slower and so much harder to bear. My father simply sat at the head of the table, his big rough hands folded in front of him, and he looked at me for what felt like a very long time, and then he asked me a single question. He asked, "Who is the father?" And when I told him it was Daniel from the neighboring farm, an English boy, not one of our own, I watched something in my father's face close like a door being shut and locked from the inside, and I understood, in that moment, that whatever happened next was going to be far worse than any shouting could ever have been. What followed was a period of about 3 weeks that I still to this day have difficulty putting into words, though I will try, because you have asked me to be honest, and because I think there are young women even today, in our communities and perhaps in others like them, who go through something similar, and I want them to know they are not alone, even if their story unfolds differently than mine did. I was not shunned in the formal sense, not yet, because formal shunning requires a church vote and a period of process that had not yet begun. But I was, in every practical sense, set apart. My meals were still cooked for me, my bed was still made, I was not turned out of the house, but the warmth that had always filled that farmhouse, even during hard winters and lean harvests, went out of it entirely, as though someone had opened every window in January and let all the heat escape into the cold. My younger siblings were not permitted to speak with me about what had happened, though I would sometimes catch my younger sister looking at me across the barnyard with an expression that was not judgment, but something closer to grief, as though she were already mourning the loss of the sister she had known. The bishop came to our house on the second Sunday after my parents learned the truth. I will not use his name, because he has been gone from this world for many years now, and I do not think it would serve any purpose to name him. But I will tell you that he was a man I had known my entire life. A man who had baptized me only months before. A man who had held me as an infant at my own christening. And I want you to understand what it is like to sit across a kitchen table from a man who has known you your whole life, and to watch him look at you as though you have become, overnight, a stranger, and worse than a stranger, a danger, a contamination that must be carefully managed lest it spread. The conversation that followed lasted nearly 3 hours, and I was present for only the first 30 minutes of it, because after that, I was sent from the room, and my father and mother and the bishop continued speaking without me. Their voices low, occasionally rising, occasionally falling into long stretches of silence that were somehow worse than the raised voices, because I could not tell, sitting on the stairs with my knees pulled up to my chest, what those silences meant for me, or for the small life growing inside me that I had already, foolishly, begun to love. What I understood once I was finally called back into the room was this. Because I had already been baptized before the sin occurred, I would be subject to church discipline. But because I had not yet given birth, and because the church in its wisdom, or so I was told, preferred to handle matters of this delicate nature quietly, rather than through the more severe and public process of the ban, an arrangement had been reached. I would be sent to live with my mother's cousin in a different county for the remainder of my pregnancy, a common enough practice in those days. One that allowed families to manage the shame of an unwed pregnancy away from the eyes of their own church district. I would give birth there, away from home, away from Daniel, away from everyone and everything I had ever known. And the child, once born, would be given up for adoption to a family that the bishop himself would help select. A family that could give the baby, so I was told, a stable and complete home. Something I, as an unmarried mother who had already sinned so gravely, could not provide. I want to tell you what I said in that kitchen when I heard this plan laid out before me as though it had already been decided, which of course it had, though no one had thought to ask my opinion before deciding it. I said nothing at first. I simply sat very still, my hands folded in my lap the way I had been taught to sit since I was a small girl, and I felt something inside me go very quiet and very cold. A kind of quiet I had never experienced before, and have only experienced a few times since, always in moments of the deepest grief. And then, after a long silence, I asked one single question, the only question that seemed to matter to me in that moment. I asked whether I would be allowed to see Daniel before I was sent away. My father's answer was a single word. No, and that was the last time, for 38 years, that the subject of Daniel was ever spoken of in my presence by anyone in my family. I was sent to live with my mother's cousin, a woman named Verna in Holmes County, Ohio, at the end of that summer, and I remained there until the following spring. Verna was not unkind to me, and I want to be fair to her, because she did not choose the circumstances any more than I did. But she was a practical woman, not a warm one, and the months I spent under her roof were among the loneliest of my entire life. I was permitted to write letters home, though they were read, I later learned, by my mother before being passed along to anyone else, a kind of quiet censorship that none of us ever spoke of directly, but that we all understood was happening. I was not permitted to write to Daniel at all, and I did not know during those long months whether he even knew where I had gone, or whether my family had told his family some other story entirely to explain my sudden disappearance from the community. I think of that autumn and winter now, so many years later, as a kind of long gray fog. I helped Verna with her own large family, cooking and cleaning and mending, my body growing heavier and slower as the months passed. And in the evenings, when the work was done, I would sit by the window of the small attic room I had been given and watch the snow fall over unfamiliar fields, and I would place my hands over the place where I could feel, more and more clearly as the weeks went by, the small movements of the life inside me. And I would talk to that baby in whispers, because I did not know what else to do with the enormous weight of love that had grown up inside me alongside her. Love that I had been told, over and over, in every possible way that a family and a community can tell a young woman such a thing, was not mine to keep. I want to pause here and tell you something that I have never told anyone. Not my husband, not my other children, not even my own mother before she passed. I knew, somehow, from very early on, that the baby was a girl. I had no way of knowing this for certain, not in those days, not without the kind of medical tests that exist now, but I knew it the way you sometimes simply know a thing. And I was right, though I would not have proof of it for 38 more years. I began, in the privacy of my own mind, to call her Grace, though I never told anyone this name, because I understood, even then, that whatever name I chose for her in my heart would not be the name she carried out into the world, and I did not want to confuse the two. The daughter of my imagination, and the daughter who would actually be raised by strangers, though of course in the end they turned out to be the very same little girl, carrying two names her whole life without ever knowing it. She was born in the second week of March in a small hospital outside of Millersburg, Ohio, after a labor that lasted nearly 18 hours, and I want to tell you about the birth itself, though it is difficult, even now, even after all these years, to speak of it without my voice catching in my throat. I was permitted, by the arrangement that had been made, to hold her for exactly 1 hour after she was born. 1 hour out of an entire lifetime. I remember every single second of that hour with a clarity that has never dimmed. Not even as so much of the rest of my life has grown soft and blurred at the edges the way memory does when you reach my age. I remember the particular weight of her in my arms, lighter than I had imagined, and heavier than anything I had ever carried. I remember her dark hair, so much of it for a newborn. The nurses commented on it. I remember her fingers, impossibly small, closing around my own finger with a grip that seemed, even then, stubborn and determined. A grip that I would later learn was entirely in keeping with the woman she grew up to become. I remember singing to her, very softly, one of the old hymns from the Orsband, the only music I knew, and I remember thinking, even as I sang, that I was singing a lullaby and a goodbye in the very same breath, and that no mother should ever have to do both of those things at once. When the hour ended, a nurse came into the room, and I want to tell you that this nurse was kind, was gentle, was clearly uncomfortable with what she had been asked to do, and I do not blame her for any part of what happened, because she was simply the last link in a long chain of decisions that had been made by people far more powerful than either of us. She held out her arms, and I understood what was being asked of me. And I want to tell you that I handed my daughter over, willingly, calmly, with dignity. Because that is the story I told myself for many years afterward, that I had been strong, that I had done the right thing, that I had accepted God's will and my community's judgment with grace. But that is not entirely the truth, and I promised you the truth. The truth is that I did not want to let go, and for one terrible, endless moment, my arms simply would not obey what my mind was telling them they had to do. And it was Verna, standing in the doorway, who finally stepped forward and gently, firmly, pried my fingers loose, one at a time, the way you might loosen the grip of a very small child who has fallen asleep, holding on to something precious. I do not remember making a sound. I have been told, by Verna herself, many years later, near the end of her own life, that I did not cry out, that I made no sound at all, that I simply went very still and very white and did not speak again for the better part of 2 days. I did not know, when they carried my daughter out of that hospital room where she was going. I was told by the woman from the adoption agency who visited me briefly the following day that she had gone to a good family, a stable family, a family who very much wanted a child and would love her well. I was not told the family's name. I was not told where they lived. I was not shown so much as a single photograph. I was simply told that it was done, that it was finished, that I should rest and heal and prepare to go home to my parents' farm, where life would resume in time, as though none of this had ever happened. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I think it is important. I gave birth to a daughter, held her for one single hour, and then was sent home to resume my life as though I had simply been away visiting relatives, which was, in fact, the story that was told to most of our own community back in Lancaster County. Most people never knew the truth of where I had gone or why. They were told I had gone to help my mother's cousin, who was recovering from an illness. It was not entirely a lie. It was simply not the whole truth, and in our community, in those days, there was a great deal of space carved out for things that were not entirely lies, but were also not the whole truth. And I lived inside that space, silently, for 38 years. I returned home to Lancaster County in the late spring of that year, and I want to tell you honestly that the person who returned was not the same young woman who had left the previous summer. Something in me had gone quiet in a way that never entirely lifted, not for years, and my mother, who I think carried her own private grief over the whole affair, though she never once said so directly, tried in her own limited way to help me back into the rhythms of ordinary life. She kept me busy. She had me help with canning, with quilting, with the endless small tasks that fill an Amish woman's days, and I understood, even then, that this busyness was itself a kind of medicine, the only medicine my mother knew how to offer, because our people did not have words for what I now understand to be grief and trauma, and the particular kind of wound that comes from losing a child you were never even allowed to properly love out loud. I did not see Daniel again. I want to tell you what became of him, or at least what I was told, though I have never been entirely certain how much of it was true. I heard, through the careful, whispered channels through which all real information traveled in our community, that his family had, within a year of my leaving, sold their farm and moved away, out to somewhere in the western part of the state, and that Daniel himself had eventually gone even further, out to somewhere in Ohio or Indiana, no one seemed entirely certain, to attend a university, something that would have been as foreign and unreachable to me as the moon. I do not know to this day whether Daniel ever knew that I had been pregnant. I do not know whether he ever knew he had a daughter. This is one of the great unanswered questions of my life, and I have made a kind of uneasy peace with never knowing the answer, though I will tell you, because I promised you honesty, that there are still nights, even now, even at my age, when I lie awake and wonder. It was almost exactly 2 years after my daughter was born that I married Jonas. I want to tell you about Jonas, because he became, in the end, the great steady love of my adult life, even though our marriage did not begin in the way romantic stories are supposed to begin. Jonas was a widower, 11 years older than me, a quiet, solid man who had lost his first wife to a fever 2 winters before, leaving him with 3 young children and a farm he could not properly run alone. Our marriage was arranged in the way many marriages in our community were arranged in those days, not through matchmaking exactly, but through the quiet, practical machinery of a small community where everyone knows everyone's circumstances, and where a young woman with a bruised reputation and a widower with 3 motherless children and a struggling farm are, in the eyes of the community, a sensible match, whatever their hearts might have to say about the matter. I did not love Jonas when I married him. I want to be honest about that, because I have come to believe that honesty about the hard parts of a story is what gives the good parts their real weight. I married Jonas because it was expected of me. Because my period of disgrace, as it was quietly understood to be, needed some kind of resolution, and because, I will admit, some small wounded part of me believed that I did not deserve, and would never again be offered, a marriage built on love rather than convenience. But I want to tell you what happened over the following years, because it is one of the great surprising gifts of my life, and it deserves to be told. I grew to love Jonas. Not all at once, not the way I had loved Daniel, with all that fire and secrecy and longing, but slowly, the way you grow to love a garden you tend every single day for years, watching it change through every season, coming to understand its particular needs and rhythms, until one day you look up and realize the garden has become one of the great loves of your life without your ever quite noticing the exact moment it happened. Jonas was patient with me in a way I did not always deserve. He never once, in all the years we were married, asked me a single question about the child he clearly understood I had given up, though I know he knew. Because everyone in our small world knew, in that quiet way that knowledge travels through communities like ours, spoken about everywhere except directly to the person it concerns. He simply loved me, steadily, without conditions, and he raised his 3 children from his first marriage alongside the 5 more children we would eventually have together, and he never once, in nearly 50 years of marriage, made me feel like anything less than a whole and worthy woman, even in the years when I did not feel that way about myself. I want to tell you about the years that followed, because I think it is important for you to understand that grief, when it is not allowed to be spoken, does not disappear. It simply goes underground, and it finds other ways to surface. I threw myself into raising my children, all 8 of them eventually, Jonas's 3 and our 5 together, with an intensity that I did not fully understand at the time, but that I recognize now, looking back, as an attempt to fill a hole that could never actually be filled that way. Every March, on the 2nd week of the month, without fail, for 38 years, I would find some private moment, alone in the garden, or alone in the barn during evening chores, to quietly mark the day my daughter had been born. Though I never told a single soul what that private ritual meant, and my own children, growing up, must have simply thought their mother occasionally needed a few minutes alone, which was true enough, as far as it went, without ever touching the deeper truth of it. My father, Eli, lived to be 93 years old, an extraordinarily long life for a man who had worked as hard and as physically as he had worked his entire life. And I want to tell you that our relationship, in his later years, was a complicated one. We never spoke of what had happened when I was 20 years old. Not once, in over 50 years, did either of us bring up the subject directly. But I want to tell you something strange that I noticed, and that I did not understand until much later. Until the cedar chest. Until the letters. In his later years, my father developed a habit of going quiet, distant, whenever the subject of adoption came up in any conversation, even conversations that had nothing at all to do with our family. Conversations about neighbors, about news from other church districts, about the increasingly common practice of Amish families adopting children from overseas through certain church-approved agencies. He would grow still. His eyes would drift towards some middle distance, and then After a moment, he would find a reason to leave the room. I noticed this pattern for years without ever understanding what it meant. I simply assumed it was some private discomfort tied to what had happened to me, to us, all those years before. I had no idea, not for one single moment, that the truth ran so much deeper than that, and touched a part of my father's own life that had happened long before I was even born. My father passed away in the winter of my 69th year, peacefully, in his sleep, in the same farmhouse where he had lived his entire life, and where I had grown up, and where my mother, who had passed some years before him, had also lived out her final days. As the fourth of 9 children, and one of the few who still lived close enough to help, I was given the task, along with 2 of my sisters, of going through my father's belongings in the weeks after the funeral, sorting what would be kept within the family, what would be given to the church for the poor, and what would simply need to be set aside and dealt with in time. It was slow, tender work, the kind of work that forces you to hold your grief in one hand and your memories in the other, and I want to tell you that I approached it with no expectation whatsoever of finding anything unusual. My father was not a man who kept many possessions. He believed, as we all were raised to believe, that a simple life was a righteous life, and his belongings, even after 93 years, fit easily into a single small room. It was in the very back of his bedroom closet, beneath a stack of old quilts that had belonged to my mother, that we found the cedar chest. It was not a large chest, perhaps 2 feet by 3 feet, made of dark cedar that still, even after all those years closed up in a closet, gave off a faint, sweet smell when the lid was finally lifted. My sisters and I assumed, at first, that it would contain old letters and documents of the ordinary kind, deeds to the farm, records of livestock sales. Perhaps some of my mother's old correspondence with relatives back in Ohio and Indiana. And for the first layer or 2, that is exactly what we found. But near the bottom of the chest, beneath a false wooden panel that I do not think my sisters even noticed, because I happened to be the one lifting that particular layer of papers, I found a bundle of letters tied together with a length of faded blue ribbon, and the moment I saw the handwriting on the topmost envelope, my whole body went cold, because I recognized, immediately, the particular, careful, old-fashioned script of an address written by someone who was clearly not Amish. The envelope was addressed simply to Eli, care of a post office box in a nearby town, a post office box I had never once, in my entire life, known my father to maintain. I want to tell you that I did not open those letters immediately. I sat there, on the floor of my father's closet, for what must have been nearly 20 minutes, simply holding that small bundle of envelopes in my lap, my heart pounding in a way I could not fully explain to myself. Though some part of me, some old, buried, 20-year-old part of me that had never entirely stopped waiting for answers, already knew, somehow, that I had found something that was going to change everything I thought I understood about my own life. I told my sisters I needed a moment alone, which was not unusual, given the emotional nature of the work we were doing, and I carried that bundle of letters out to my father's old workshop, sat down on the same wooden stool where I had watched him repair harnesses as a small girl, and I began to read. The first several letters I want to tell you were bewildering to me, because they referenced a series of events I knew nothing about at all, events that had taken place long before I was even born. They were written to my father from a woman named Ruth Miller, and her husband, a man named Walter Miller, and the earliest letters, dated back to the 1940s, spoke of an event that I had never once heard mentioned in my entire life. Not by my father, not by my mother, not by any of my aunts or uncles or the older relatives, who usually loved nothing more than telling stories about the family's past. The letters spoke of a bonfire. I want to tell you what I pieced together, slowly, over the course of that long afternoon in my father's workshop, reading and rereading those letters until the light through the small window began to fail, and I had to light a lamp to keep reading. In the winter of 1946, when my father was a young man of only 19, not yet married, not yet the stern patriarch I had grown up knowing, a fire broke out in his own father's barn during a terrible ice storm. A fire that trapped my father inside when a support beam collapsed across the only exit and pinned his leg beneath a weight he could not move alone. He would have died there, in that burning barn, if not for a young English couple who lived on a neighboring property, a couple named Walter and Ruth Miller, who saw the smoke and the flames from their own farmhouse and ran, without a moment's hesitation, into a burning building to save a young Amish stranger they barely knew. Walter Miller, the letters explained, had suffered severe burns to both of his hands and forearms pulling that beam aside, injuries that never fully healed and that troubled him, according to Ruth's later letters, for the rest of his life. My father, the letters made clear, considered his own life, quite literally, a debt owed to Walter and Ruth Miller, and in the years that followed the fire, a friendship developed between my father and this English couple that was, by every account I could piece together from those letters, deep and abiding and carefully hidden from almost everyone in our own community. Because friendships of that closeness between Amish and English families, particularly friendships maintained privately over years and years, were not something that would have been easily understood or accepted by our church district in those days, and I suspect even now would raise eyebrows in many districts today. My father visited the Millers privately, quietly, for years, a fact that stunned me, because I had never once in my entire childhood heard their name spoken in our home. And then, in a letter dated 1950, 3 years before I was even born, I found the piece of the story that changed everything. Ruth Miller wrote to my father, in a letter so tender and so raw with grief, that I found myself weeping over it in that workshop, that she and Walter had just received the final devastating word from their doctor that they would never be able to have children of their own, a consequence, the doctor believed, of complications from a difficult illness Ruth had suffered years before. She wrote to my father, of all people, because by that point he had become, in her words, closer to family than most of her own blood relatives. And she wrote something in that letter that I have read so many times since that I can nearly recite it from memory. Something to the effect that if God ever saw fit to place a child in need of a home within my father's reach, she hoped he would think of them first, before any stranger, because she believed, with her whole heart, that whatever child came to them would be loved beyond all measure, precisely because they had wanted a child so desperately and for so long. I sat with that letter for a long time before I could bring myself to continue reading, because I already understood, with a kind of sick certainty settling into my stomach, where this story was going, though I still did not want to believe it. I forced myself to keep reading, letter after letter, moving forward through the years, through the 1950s, watching a friendship deepen across letters that spoke of harvests and health and small domestic joys and sorrows, until I reached a letter dated the summer of 1975, the very summer I discovered I was pregnant. That letter was not from Ruth Miller. It was a letter my father had written, though never sent. A draft that he must have composed and then, for reasons I will never fully know, decided to keep rather than mail, tucked into the same bundle as though he could not bear to throw it away, but also could not bear to send it. In that letter, addressed to Walter and Ruth, my father wrote about his own daughter, about me, about the disgrace I had brought upon the family. Though I want to tell you that even in the rawest, most private version of his feelings, a version he apparently believed no one would ever read, my father did not write about me with hatred, or even primarily with anger. He wrote about me with something that, reading it now, I recognize as a terrible, tangled combination of shame and fear and love, all knotted together so tightly that I do not think even he could have told you where one feeling ended and another began. But it was the final paragraph of that letter that undid me completely, sitting alone in that workshop as the last light of that winter afternoon faded from the small window. My father wrote that he had thought, many times over the years, of Ruth's letter from 1952, of her words about hoping he would think of them first. And he wrote that he believed, with what he called a certainty he could not fully explain, even to himself, that God had been preparing this exact moment for over 20 years, that the fire and the friendship and Ruth's inability to have children, and now his own daughter's disgrace, were not separate threads at all, but a single thread that God had been weaving the entire time. And that the kindest thing he could do, the only thing that could bring any redemption at all out of a situation he found almost unbearably shameful, would be to give his own grandchild to the two people who had once saved his life, and who had asked so many years before to be given exactly this chance. I want to tell you what this meant, once I understood it fully. Sitting there with those letters scattered across my lap, my father had not chosen to give my daughter up for adoption to a stranger, the way I had believed for 38 years. He had chosen, deliberately, specifically, to give her to Walter and Ruth Miller, the very couple who had pulled him from a burning barn a quarter of a century before I was even born, in what he clearly understood, in his own mind and heart, as a repayment of the greatest debt of his life, a debt he believed he could never otherwise repay. My pregnancy, my disgrace, the very worst thing that had ever happened to me, had become, in my father's private understanding of the world, God's own instrument for settling an old account. And my daughter, the granddaughter he never once acknowledged to me, had become the currency. I do not know, even now, exactly how I feel about this, and I promised you I would be honest, so I will not pretend to you that I arrived at some easy, tidy peace with what I learned that afternoon. Part of me, and I want to be truthful about this part too, felt a surge of anger unlike anything I had felt in my entire adult life, a fury that my father had made a decision of that magnitude, involving my own body and my own child, based on a private debt and a private theology that he had never once shared with me, never once explained to me, never once even hinted at in 50 years of living under the same roof and the same silence. I had spent 38 years believing my daughter had been given to strangers because I was not fit to raise her, because my sin had made me unworthy, when the truth was so much stranger and so much more complicated than that, a truth that had almost nothing to do with me at all, and everything to do with a fire that happened before I was even born. But there was another part of me, and this part grew larger the longer I sat with those letters, that also, quite unexpectedly, felt something that I can only describe as a strange, unwelcome kind of relief. Because if my father had chosen the Millers specifically, deliberately, because he trusted them with his entire life, then perhaps I allowed myself to hope for the first time in 38 years my daughter had not simply been handed off to strangers at all. Perhaps she had been given, however painfully, however wrongly the whole process had been carried out, to people who had wanted a child so desperately, for so long, that they would have loved her with everything they had. I continued reading, moving through the remaining letters in that bundle, and what I found in the years that followed 1975 surprised me almost as much as the fire itself had. My father had not, as I had assumed for 38 years, simply handed my daughter away and closed that chapter of his life forever. He had continued corresponding with Ruth and Walter Miller for the rest of his days, and folded into several of those later letters, tucked carefully between the pages like pressed flowers, I found photographs. I want to tell you what it is to hold, for the very first time, a photograph of your own daughter at age 4, sitting on a porch swing in a yellow dress, laughing at something just outside the frame of the picture, when you have spent 38 years without so much as a single image of her face. I want to tell you what it is to find another photograph, taken perhaps 8 years later, of a serious dark-haired girl standing beside a school bus with a stack of books held against her chest, and to search that face, hungrily, desperately, for some resemblance to your own, and to find it in the particular shape of her eyebrows, in the particular set of her jaw, features I recognized because I saw them every single day in my own mirror. My father had watched my daughter grow up through letters and photographs sent quietly, secretly, from an English couple 2 counties away, for over 20 years, and he had never once told me he had known her name. I found it, finally, in a letter from 1976, the year after her birth. The Millers had named her Grace. Grace, the very name I had whispered to her in that hospital room in Millersburg, Ohio, 38 years before. The name I had never told a single living soul, believing it to be a secret that belonged only to me and to the 1 hour I had spent as her mother in every sense that mattered. And here it was, sitting in my father's handwriting, in a letter he had written to Ruth Miller not long after the adoption was finalized, a letter in which he mentioned, almost in passing, that he was glad they had chosen to keep the name, because his own daughter, meaning me, had apparently mentioned it once, in the depths of her grief, before leaving the hospital. I do not remember telling anyone the name. I do not remember, in the fog of those days, speaking it aloud to a single soul. But somehow, my father had known. And somehow, that name had traveled from my lips to Ruth Miller's ears, to the birth certificate of the child I had given up. And she had carried that name with her for her entire life, never knowing. I would later learn that it had come from the whispered prayers of a heartbroken 20-year-old girl in a hospital bed she would never remember. I did not sleep at all that night. I sat up in the small guest bedroom of my father's farmhouse, the bundle of letters and photographs spread across the quilt in front of me, and I read every single letter at least twice more, trying to absorb the full shape of what I had learned, trying to understand not just the facts of it, but the feeling of it, the enormous, complicated, decades-long secret that my father had carried silently to his grave. A secret that had shaped the entire course of my life without my ever having the slightest idea it existed. I want to tell you that by the time the sun came up the next morning, I had made a decision, and the decision was this. I was going to find my daughter, whatever it took, however long it took, and I was going to tell her the truth, or as much of the truth as I could piece together, because I could not bear the thought of dying, as my father had died, with this enormous story locked silently inside me. The letters from my father's correspondence with the Millers had stopped, I noticed, in the late 1990s, and the last letter in the bundle, dated 1998, was not from Ruth, but from a woman I did not recognize, signing herself only as a family friend, informing my father, with evident kindness and care, that both Walter and Ruth Miller had passed away within 8 months of each other. Walter from complications related to his heart. Ruth, the letter suggested gently, simply from grief and old age, unable to bear very long the loss of a husband she had loved for over 50 years. The letter mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that their daughter Grace had handled all of the arrangements, and that she had asked the family friend to pass along her father's thanks to Eli for his long friendship with her parents, though the letter made clear that Grace herself did not appear to fully understand the nature of that friendship, or its connection to her own life. This meant I understood with a fresh wave of grief on top of everything else I was already carrying, that my father had continued this quiet correspondence for over 20 years without me ever knowing, and that at some point, for reasons I would never fully know, the letters had simply stopped, whether because there was no one left for him to write to who remembered the full story, or because grief had simply worn down even his considerable capacity for keeping secrets. I sat with that final letter for a long time, understanding that whatever search I was about to undertake would have to be conducted almost entirely without my father's help, because he had taken so much of the crucial information, the exact location, the family's later movements, whatever else he might have known, silently with him into his grave. It took me nearly 4 months to find her. I want to tell you honestly that this process was not easy for a 70-year-old Amish widow who had never in her life used a computer or a telephone with any real fluency. But I want to tell you also that I was helped in this search by 2 of my own grown children, who I finally, after 4 months of quiet, private effort, decided to bring into my confidence, because I simply could not do it alone, and because I had come to believe, somewhere in the middle of that long winter, that keeping this particular secret any longer, even from my own children, would be repeating the very same mistake my father had made with me. My daughter Miriam, my second youngest, who had left the Amish church some years before to join a more progressive Mennonite congregation, and who therefore had more comfortable access to the tools of the modern world, became in many ways the engine of that search. She helped me place a call to the county records office in Ohio. She helped me search through old newspaper archives for any mention of the Miller family. She helped me, eventually, find an obituary notice for Walter Miller from 1998 that listed among his surviving family a daughter, Grace Miller Hendricks, of a small town in central Ohio, and a son-in-law, and 3 grandchildren. I want to tell you what it was to see my daughter's married name in print for the very first time, Grace Miller Hendricks, and to understand from that single line of newsprint that she had grown up, had fallen in love, had married, had children of her own, an entire full life that I had known nothing about, that had unfolded across nearly 4 decades without a single thread connecting back to me, except for the quiet, hidden letters my father had exchanged with her parents, letters she herself had apparently never known about. Writing that first letter to Grace was, without any exaggeration, one of the hardest tasks I have ever undertaken in my entire life. Harder in some ways than the day I gave her up. Because on that day 38 years before, I had no choice in the matter. The decision had been made for me by people with more power than I had. But this letter was entirely my own choice, and I understood, sitting at my kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper in front of me for the better part of 3 days, that whatever I wrote could either open a door that had been closed for 38 years, or it could close that door forever, if Grace decided, as she had every right to decide, that she wanted nothing to do with the woman who had given her away as an infant. I wrote and rewrote that letter more times than I can count. My first attempts were too long, too full of explanation, too desperate, I think, to justify myself. To explain the fire and the Millers and my father's private theology all at once. As though I could somehow make up for 38 years of silence in 4 pages of hurried handwriting. Miriam, bless her, read through several of these early drafts and gently suggested that perhaps I did not need to explain everything in the very first letter, that perhaps I simply needed to introduce myself, to open the door a crack, and let Grace decide for herself how wide she wanted to open it. The letter I finally sent. In the early spring of that year, almost exactly 38 years to the month since Grace had been born, was far shorter than any of my earlier attempts. I told her my name. I told her that I believed I was her birth mother, and I explained, briefly, the circumstances of her birth in Millersburg, Ohio. Information I hoped would be enough to confirm, for her, that I was not mistaken, that I was not some stranger reaching out with false claims. I told her that I had recently learned, through papers left behind after my own father's death, some of the history connecting our 2 families. A history I very much wanted to share with her if she was willing, but that I understood completely if she was not. And that whatever she decided, I wanted her to know that not a single year had passed, in 38 years, without my thinking of her, without my quietly marking the anniversary of her birth, without my wondering whether she had grown up happy, whether she had been loved, whether somewhere out in the world she carried any small trace of curiosity about the woman who had carried her for 9 months and then had to let her go. I sent that letter on a Tuesday morning, walking it myself down to the small post office in town, rather than waiting for the mail carrier, as though the act of walking it there myself might somehow speed its journey. And then I began what turned out to be the longest 3 weeks of waiting I have ever endured. I want to tell you that I did not handle that waiting particularly gracefully. I found myself, more than once, standing at the end of our long gravel driveway in the late afternoon, watching for the mail truck the way I imagined sailors' wives once watched the horizon for ships. And Jonas, who by then knew the whole story, having been the very first person I told after my own children, would sometimes come and stand beside me in that driveway, without saying anything at all, simply offering his steady, quiet presence the way he had offered it to me for nearly 50 years of marriage. The letter came on a Thursday afternoon in early April, and I want to tell you that I recognized the handwriting on the envelope before I even read the return address, because it carried, in some strange way I cannot fully explain, an echo of my own hand. The particular slant and shape of certain letters that I would later learn, when Grace and I finally met in person, was a trait we apparently shared without either of us ever having taught the other. I sat down on the porch steps, unable to make it even as far as the kitchen table, and I opened that letter with hands that were shaking so badly I nearly tore the pages inside. Grace wrote that she had, in fact, always known she was adopted. Her parents, Walter and Ruth, she wrote, had never once tried to hide this fact from her, had told her from the earliest age she could remember that she had been chosen, wanted, prayed for, in a way that made her feel throughout her entire childhood, not like a consolation prize, but like the direct answer to a specific and heartfelt prayer. She wrote that she had wondered about her birth family many times over the years, particularly after she had children of her own, and found herself, more than once, staring at her own daughter's face, searching for traces of a woman she had never met. She wrote that she had, in fact, begun a search of her own several years earlier, through one of the adoption registries that had become available as records slowly opened up over the decades, but that the search had stalled, the trail going cold at exactly the point where my identity, protected by the closed adoption laws of that era, and by the particular secrecy of the arrangement my father had made, simply disappeared into a wall of sealed records. And then, near the end of that letter, Grace wrote something that undid me completely, sitting there on those porch steps in the April sunshine. She wrote that all her life, she had known one small, strange detail about her own adoption that her parents had shared with her. A detail she had never fully understood, but had always found deeply moving. She wrote that her parents had told her, more than once, that her birth mother's own father had personally selected them out of what must have been many possible families, because he trusted them completely, and that whenever Grace had asked why her parents had been chosen specifically, her mother Ruth would simply smile and say that it was a very long story about a fire, a story Ruth had promised she would tell Grace in full one day, a promise that Ruth, in the end, passed away before ever fully keeping. Grace wrote that she had spent nearly 38 years wondering about that fire, about that story, and that she very much hoped, if I was willing, that I might finally be able to tell her the rest of it. We exchanged several more letters over the following weeks, each one a little longer, a little more open than the last. And then, in early May, Grace called the small phone shanty at the end of our neighbor's lane, the closest telephone available to our farm, having somehow tracked down the number through a mutual understanding, worked out over our letters, of exactly when I could be reached there. I want to tell you what it was to hear my daughter's voice for the very first time in 38 years. Though, of course, in the truest sense, it was the first time in my entire life, because I had never once, not for a single moment beyond that first hour after her birth, heard her voice at all. She had a warm voice, a little lower than I expected, with the particular flattened vowels of someone who had grown up in central Ohio. And she laughed, partway through our conversation, at some small awkward thing I said. And I recognized that laugh, immediately, impossibly, as an echo of Daniel's laugh, the very same laugh that had first caught my attention across a summer field over 50 years before, and I had to press my hand against my mouth to keep from weeping right there in my neighbor's phone shanty. We arranged to meet in person 3 weeks later, at a restaurant in a small town roughly halfway between her home in central Ohio and my home in Lancaster County. A compromise that required each of us to travel several hours, though of course my own travel was complicated by the fact that I do not drive, and Jonas, by then 81 years old himself and not entirely steady on long car rides, arranged for one of our English neighbors, a kind man named Robert, who had driven us on various errands over the years, to take us the whole distance in his car. A journey of nearly 5 hours that felt, to me, sitting in the back seat with my hands folded tightly in my lap the entire way, like the longest journey of my entire life, longer even than the journey home from Ohio 38 years before. Though in every practical sense it covered almost exactly the same roads in reverse. I want to tell you about walking into that restaurant, because I have relived that moment more times than I can count in the months since, turning it over and over in my memory like a smooth stone I cannot stop touching. Grace had arrived before us, and she was seated at a table near the window, and I recognized her instantly, before she even looked up, because I had spent 38 years imagining her face, updating that imagination with every photograph my father had secretly collected. And here, finally, was the living woman those photographs had only ever hinted at. She had dark hair, graying now at the temples the way mine had grayed years before, and she had my mother's small, quick hands, folded around a coffee cup on the table in front of her. And when she looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, both of us went completely still for what felt like a very long moment. 2 women staring at each other across a restaurant, each one searching the other's face for something we could not have named even if you had asked us. I do not remember crossing that restaurant. I do not remember sitting down. I remember, with absolute clarity, reaching across that table and taking her hands in mine, and I remember saying, though I do not know where the words came from, that I had waited 38 years to finish counting her fingers. A strange and perhaps foolish thing to say, but Grace understood immediately, because I had written to her in one of our earlier letters about that single hour after her birth, about counting her tiny fingers one by one while I still had the chance, and I watched her face crumple. Watched 38 years of her own private wondering finally find somewhere to land, and we sat there in that small restaurant, 2 grown women, one 71 and one 38, holding hands across a table and weeping openly in front of a room full of strangers who had no idea what they were witnessing, and I want to tell you, I did not care. Not even a little bit, who saw us. Because I had spent 38 years hiding this particular grief, and I was finished hiding it. We talked for nearly 6 hours that day, long past the point when the restaurant staff must have wished we would order something more than the endless refills of coffee we kept requesting, and I want to tell you some of what I learned about my daughter's life, because I think it matters, and because it brought me a peace I had not expected to find. Grace told me that Walter and Ruth Miller had indeed loved her beyond all measure, exactly as my father had hoped they would. Exactly as Ruth had promised in that letter from 1952, written 3 years before I was even born. She told me stories of her childhood on their small farm, of Walter teaching her to fish in the creek behind their property, of Ruth staying up late into the night helping her with school projects, of a childhood that had been, by every measure Grace could offer me, happy and secure and full of love, even carrying within it the particular tender ache of knowing, from an early age, that somewhere out in the world was another woman who had carried her first. Grace told me she had become a nurse, working for over 30 years in a small hospital, not far from where she had grown up, and I want to tell you what it meant to me, hearing that. To understand that my daughter had spent her entire working life caring for other people's bodies, with the same gentle, practical competence I recognized in my own mother's hands. In my own hands, a thread of inheritance that had somehow traveled forward across 38 years of separation, and landed, unexplainably, in exactly the same place it might have landed if she had grown up on our own farm. She told me about her husband, a kind man named Tom, a schoolteacher, and about her 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, and about her 5 grandchildren, and I want to tell you that hearing the number 5 made me laugh out loud, right there in that restaurant, because Jonas and I had, by then, 23 grandchildren of our own between us, and Grace laughed too when I told her that number, and we spent nearly 20 minutes simply trading stories about grandchildren. 2 grandmothers who had never met falling into the easy, universal rhythm of grandmother talk as though we had known each other our entire lives. Eventually, our conversation turned, as I knew it eventually must, to the story of the fire, and I told Grace everything I had pieced together from those letters in my father's cedar chest, the burning barn, the young Amish man trapped beneath a fallen beam, the English couple who ran into the flames without a moment's hesitation, Walter's burned hands that never fully healed, the friendship that grew quietly across the years that followed, Ruth's letter from 1952, written 3 years before either of us was even born, asking my father to think of them first if he ever knew of a child in need of a home. I told her about my father's own letter, the one he never sent, in which he wrote of believing that God had been weaving this single thread for over 20 years preparing this exact moment, long before either Grace or I had even been conceived. Grace listened to all of this in a silence so complete that for a moment I worried I had overwhelmed her, said too much, told her too fast the way my very first drafts of that letter had tried to do. But when I finally finished, she sat back in her chair and let out a long, slow breath, and she told me something that I think may be the single most important thing anyone has said to me in the entire course of this long story. She said that hearing this history did not make her feel, as I had worried it might, like a debt that had been paid using her own body, a piece of currency traded between an old man and the couple who had saved his life. She said instead that it made her feel, for the very first time in her entire life, like every single part of her existence had been woven together with intention and love, however strange and complicated that love had been, however many silences and hidden letters it had required. She said that knowing her parents had wanted her so desperately, for so many years before she was even born, made the love she had felt from them her entire childhood feel even more solid beneath her feet than it already had. And that knowing my own father had trusted them enough to hand over his own grandchild told her something important about the kind of man Walter Miller must have been. Something she had always known in her heart, but had never before had confirmed from an outside source. We asked each other, over the following months, as our correspondence and our visits continued, all the smaller questions that had accumulated over 38 years of separate lives. Grace wanted to know about Daniel, and I told her everything I knew, which was frustratingly little. The rumors of his family moving away, his own move even further west, the university he was said to have attended, and I told her, honestly, that I had made a small effort over the years since our reunion to try to locate him as well, through the same kind of searching that had eventually led me to her. But that so far, that particular search had turned up very little, and I have come to accept, with a peace that surprised me, that some threads in this story may simply remain loose ends for the rest of my life, and that this, too, is a kind of truth I have had to learn to live inside. Grace wanted to know about the Amish faith, about the life I still lived, and I want to tell you that meeting Grace did not shake my faith, though I know some of you watching this may have expected that it would, may have expected this story to end with me renouncing the church that had asked so much of me and given me at times so little comfort in return. That is not what happened. I remained, and remain still, a member of my church district, still wearing the cap and the plain dress I have worn my entire life, still attending preaching every other Sunday, still living according to the ordnung that has structured every single day of my long life. But I want to tell you that my faith, in the years since finding those letters and finding Grace, has changed in a way I find difficult to fully put into words. I no longer believe, as I was taught to believe as a young woman, that the church's judgment and God's judgment are always and automatically the very same thing. I have come to believe that human beings, even good and faithful human beings, even bishops and fathers, acting out of what they sincerely believe is love and duty, can make decisions that cause tremendous harm while genuinely believing, the entire time, that they are doing God's own will. I do not know how to reconcile all of that within the framework I was raised in, and at 71 years old, I am not sure I need to fully reconcile it. I have simply learned to hold both things at once, my faith and my grief, my love for the community that raised me, and my anger at the silence that community demanded of me for 38 years. And I have found, to my own surprise, that a person can hold both of these things without either one canceling the other out. I have visited Grace's home in Ohio 4 times now since that first meeting in the restaurant, and she has visited our farm in Lancaster County twice. A visit that required considerable explanation to some of the more curious members of our community. Though I have found, in my old age, that I care far less than I once did about what the neighbors think. A kind of freedom that I suspect only comes with the particular vantage point of having already survived the very worst thing you believed the neighbor's judgment could ever do to you. Grace has met most of her half-siblings now, my 8 other children, and I want to tell you that the reception was not uniformly easy. Some of my children embraced her immediately and completely, particularly Miriam, who had helped with the search from the very beginning and who has since become, I believe, genuinely close with Grace. The 2 of them exchanging letters and photographs of their own children with a warmth that makes my old heart ache with gratitude every time I witness it. Others among my children needed more time, needed to work through their own complicated feelings about a sister they never knew existed, about a mother who had kept, however unknowingly at first, such an enormous secret from them for their entire lives. I do not blame any of them for whatever time they needed. Every single person in this story, I have come to understand, was handed a piece of a puzzle they did not choose, and every single person has had to find their own way of fitting that piece into the larger picture of their life. I want to talk for a while now about forgiveness, because I know that some of you watching this have been waiting to hear whether I ever forgave my father. And I think you deserve an honest answer, rather than a tidy one. For a long time after finding those letters, I was not sure I would ever be able to forgive him. My father had died before I found the cedar chest, which meant that whatever forgiveness I eventually offered would have to be extended into an empty room, spoken to a man who could no longer hear it, could no longer explain himself further, could no longer ask for it directly or receive it directly either. I have stood at his grave more than once since that winter, in every season, in the heat of summer and the bitter cold of January, and I have said things to that headstone that I never once said to him while he was alive, and I do not know whether that counts as forgiveness in the way the word is usually meant, but I know that it has helped me, slowly, over time, to set down some portion of the anger I carried out of that workshop the night I first read those letters. Here is what I have come to understand, and I offer it to you not as an answer, but simply as the honest place I have arrived after several years of turning this over in my mind. Turning it over the way you turn over a stone in a creek bed, examining every side of it. My father was a young man of 19 when Walter Miller pulled him from a burning barn, badly enough injured himself that he carried the scars on his hands for the rest of his life as a permanent reminder of what he had done for a stranger. My father spent the rest of his life believing, with the particular fierce sincerity of a faith that does not leave much room for doubt or nuance, that a debt of that magnitude required an answer of equal magnitude, and when circumstance handed him what he believed was exactly the right opportunity to settle that debt, he took it, without asking me, without considering, I think, that my own daughter was not his to give, that a debt incurred by his own body decades before could not rightly be repaid using a child that belonged, first and always, to me. I do not think my father set out to hurt me. I think my father, in the moment he made that decision, believed with his whole heart that he was doing something beautiful, something that would bring redemption out of shame, love out of disgrace, and I do not think it ever fully occurred to him, not in any way he could articulate even to himself, that the daughter standing in front of him, weeping and begging to at least see the boy she loved one more time, had her own claim on that child that outweighed any debt owed to a fire that happened before she was even born. I have decided, And I want to tell you this decision did not come easily and did not come quickly. That I can hold my father accountable for the harm his silence and his unilateral decision caused me, while also understanding that he was, in his own broken and limited way, trying to do something he believed was good. I do not think these two things cancel each other out. I think a person can cause real harm while also being, in other respects, a genuinely loving father, a genuinely faithful man, and I think the refusal to hold both of those truths at once, the insistence that a person must be either entirely good or entirely bad, is itself part of what allowed a community like the one I grew up in to make decisions like the one that was made about my body and my daughter without ever pausing to ask whether the person most affected by that decision might have something important to say about it. If you are watching this, and you have your own story of a secret kept too long, a decision made about your life without your consent, a silence that shaped you in ways you are only now beginning to understand, I want you to know that you are not required to arrive at forgiveness on anyone else's timeline but your own. I spent nearly 2 years moving through waves of grief and anger before I found anything resembling peace. And even now, even after everything, there are days when I feel the anger rise back up in me, sharp and immediate, as though no time has passed at all since that afternoon in my father's workshop. I do not think that means I have failed at forgiveness. I think it simply means that forgiveness, real forgiveness, is not a single door you walk through once and then never think about again. It is a room you keep returning to, over and over, for the rest of your life, sometimes finding it peaceful, and sometimes finding it still full of old furniture you have not yet learned to move around. I also want to say something to any young woman watching this who might currently be facing a version of what I faced 50 years ago, whether inside a community like mine or inside some entirely different set of circumstances that nonetheless carries the same weight of shame and silence and other people making decisions about her body and her child. I want you to know that whatever choice is made, whether you keep your child or whether circumstances beyond your control take that choice away from you the way it was taken from me, the love you feel in that first hour, in those first days, in those first months of carrying a life inside your own body, is real, and it is yours. And no amount of time, no amount of silence, no amount of other people telling you to move forward and forget can actually erase it. I carried my love for Grace for 38 years without ever being permitted to speak of it. And that love did not diminish with time the way I was always told it eventually would. If anything, it grew larger and more complicated, taking up more space in my heart with each passing year, rather than less. And I want you to know that this is not a sign of weakness or an inability to move on with your life. It is simply what love does when it is denied its natural expression. It does not disappear. It waits. I think often these days about the particular kind of silence that our community, and I suspect many close-knit communities of many different kinds all over this world, has historically asked of its women. We are taught from a very young age that our first duty is to the community's peace, to the smooth, unruffled surface of church and family life, and that any disruption to that peace, even a disruption caused by our own suffering, is itself a kind of failure, a kind of selfishness. I was taught to believe that speaking too much about my own grief, insisting too loudly on my own feelings about what had happened to my daughter, would have been a further sin layered on top of the first one, a refusal to accept correction with the humility that our faith demanded of us. I want to tell you that I no longer believe this, though it has taken me the better part of my life to arrive at that disbelief. I think a community's peace that is purchased through the silence and suffering of its most vulnerable members is not true peace at all. It is simply quiet, and quiet is not the same thing as peace, no matter how much it might resemble it from the outside. I do not say this to condemn my community wholesale, and I want to be careful here, because I know that stories like mine, when they reach the wider world, can sometimes be used by people who have their own reasons for wanting to paint our whole way of life as cruel or backward. And I do not believe that, and I would not want my story used that way. I have already told you, and I meant it, that I loved my childhood, that I love my faith, that I continue to live according to the Ordnung even now, even after everything I have learned. What I am asking for, and what I hope this story might contribute to, in whatever small way a video like this one can contribute to anything, is not the abandonment of the faith and the community I love, but a gentler, more honest reckoning within it with the real cost of the silences we have historically asked of our women and of anyone in any community who does not fit easily into the narrow path that has been laid out for them. I think it is possible to keep the parts of a tradition that are beautiful and life-giving, the humility, the simplicity, the deep sense of shared purpose and shared labor, while also questioning, gently but firmly, the parts of that tradition that have caused real and lasting harm to real people. People like me, and I suspect, though I obviously cannot know for certain, people like some of you watching this video right now. Whatever faith or family or community you were raised inside, I want to tell you a little bit about what my life looks like now, because I think endings matter, and I want you to know that this story, despite everything painful woven through it, has arrived at a genuinely happy place, even if that happiness carries its own particular shape of bittersweetness within it. Grace and I speak by telephone most weeks now, a small luxury that required me to have a phone shanty built closer to our own house than the neighbor's lane where I first heard her voice. A modest accommodation that our bishop, the current one, a much gentler man than the bishop of my youth, approved without much difficulty at all. Understanding, I think, at least in some measure, the particular circumstances that made this small connection to the wider world a matter of genuine necessity rather than mere convenience. We write letters between our phone calls, long rambling letters full of the small details of daily life, the things our grandchildren have said, the recipes we have tried, the small aches and pains of growing older, and I want to tell you that these letters have become one of the great quiet joys of my old age, something I look forward to with an eagerness I have not felt about very much else in recent years. Jonas passed away 18 months ago, quietly, in his sleep, in the very same bed where we had slept together for nearly 50 years. And I want to tell you that Grace came to his funeral, standing at the edge of our community's traditional service, with a quiet respectfulness that touched me more deeply than I have words to properly express. And afterward, several of my children who had initially struggled to accept her presence in our family came and embraced her, one by one, in the yard outside the farmhouse, and I stood there, watching my scattered, complicated, hard-won family come together in that particular kind of grief that somehow also makes room for unexpected grace. And I thought, watching them, that if my father could see this moment, see his granddaughter standing among his other grandchildren, all of them united in mourning a man most of them had loved very much, he might finally understand that the debt he believed he was repaying to Walter and Ruth Miller all those years ago had produced something far larger and far more beautiful than he ever could have calculated. Something that had nothing at all to do with debts and repayments, and everything to do with the simple, stubborn persistence of love finding its way back to itself across 38 years of silence. I think about my own grandmother often these days, the one who quilted quietly rather than answering my childhood question about the birds flying free over our fence, and I have come to believe, in my old age, that she was not being unkind that day so many years ago. I think she simply did not have the words or the permission to answer a question that cut so close to the particular ache of a life, bound by rules she herself had never fully chosen, but had nonetheless spent her whole life keeping. I think of all the women in my family, going back generations before me, who carried their own private griefs in exactly this same silent way, quilting through their sorrows, humming hymns under their breath while their hands stayed busy and their mouths stayed closed. And I wonder how many of them carried stories every bit as complicated and painful as mine. Stories that went with them into the ground, never spoken, never resolved, simply absorbed into the quiet rhythm of a life that had no room set aside for that kind of telling. I have decided that I do not want to be one more woman in that long line of silence. I am 71 years old, soon to be 72, and I do not know how many years I have left in this world. But I have decided to spend whatever years remain to me telling the truth, as much of it as I can piece together, as loudly and as honestly as an old Amish grandmother sitting in front of a borrowed camera in her granddaughter's kitchen can manage to tell it. This is why I agreed to make this video, though I want to tell you, because I promised you honesty all the way through. That agreeing to it took me a long time, and several long conversations with Grace, and even a few conversations with the bishop of my own church district, who, to my considerable surprise, did not forbid it, though he made clear he was not entirely comfortable with it either. A response I have come to understand as about as much blessing as I am likely to get for a project like this one. And I have decided that it is enough. I want to leave you with a few final thoughts before I close, because I think they matter, and because an old woman telling her story on the internet has earned the right, I think, to a few closing words of her own choosing, rather than simply stopping when the story runs out. The first thought is this: if you are carrying a secret, whatever it is, whatever shape it takes in your own life, I want you to know that secrets kept out of love are still secrets, and they still cost something, even when the person keeping them believes, sincerely and completely, that they are protecting you by keeping it. My father loved me. I do not doubt that, not anymore. Not after everything I have learned and everything I have worked through in the years since. But his love, expressed through silence, cost me 38 years of not knowing my own daughter. 38 years of believing a story about my own worthlessness that turned out to be entirely untrue. If there is a secret in your own life that you are keeping out of what you believe is love, I would ask you gently to consider whether the person you are protecting might actually prefer the truth, however painful, to the particular kind of pain that comes from discovering, later, that an entire shape of their life was built on something they were never told. The second thought I want to leave you with is this: it is never too late. I found my daughter at 71 years old, 38 years after I last held her in my arms, and I want you to know that the joy of that reunion was not diminished by how long it took to arrive. If anything, I think the joy was made larger, more precious, more carefully tended, precisely because it had been so long delayed, the way a garden that has weathered a long, hard winter often produces the sweetest fruit once spring finally arrives. Whatever door you believe has closed forever in your own life, whatever relationship you have given up hope of ever repairing, whatever truth you have decided, is simply too late now to go looking for. I want you to sit with the possibility, just for a moment, that it might not be too late after all. I am living proof. An old woman in a plain dress who never expected, at 71 years old, to be sitting in front of a camera telling her story to strangers scattered all across this world. That some doors stay open far longer than we ever imagine they will, waiting patiently for us to finally find the courage to walk back through them. And the third thought, the last one, is simply this. Love does not disappear, even when it is denied every ordinary way of expressing itself. I loved my daughter for one single hour when she was born, and then I was told, in every way a community and a family can tell a young woman such a thing, that this love had no further claim on the world, that it should be set aside, buried, forgotten, so that ordinary life could resume. I want you to know that I never once succeeded in setting it aside, not for a single day in 38 years. And I no longer believe that this was a failure on my part. I believe it was simply love, doing exactly what love does, which is to persist, quietly, patiently, stubbornly, waiting for whatever small opening the world eventually offers it, and finding its way home in the end, however long that journey takes, however many fires and letters and silences and cedar chests it has to travel through along the way. I want to tell you one last small thing before I let you go, because it is the kind of detail that has stayed with me more than almost anything else in this entire long story. When Grace visited our farm for the first time, she asked if she could see the old sugar shack, where, though she did not know it at the time, her father and I had first fallen in love so many years before Daniel's family sold their land and moved away. The shack is still standing, weathered and gray now, leaning slightly to one side, no longer used for anything at all, except as a place for barn swallows to nest in the spring. Grace stood inside that little wooden building for a long time, running her hand along the old boards, and then she turned to me and said something I have thought about nearly every single day since. She said that she could feel, somehow, standing in that quiet, dusty little building, that she had been made out of love, real love, whatever complicated and painful things had happened afterward. And she said that this was a gift I had given her simply by telling her the truth. A gift her adoptive parents, for all their wonderful love, could never quite have given her on their own, because they had not been there, in that little sugar shack, all those years before, when two young people from two different worlds fell in love across a fence line neither of them had chosen, but both of them, for a little while, had been brave enough to cross anyway. I am an old woman now, and I have told you the truth. All of it, as best as I have been able to piece it together from a lifetime of silence and a single afternoon spent reading letters in my father's workshop. I do not know how many more stories I have left in me, but I have decided in these last years of my life that I would rather spend them telling the truth than keeping it. And I hope, if this story reached you, if any part of it touched something true in your own life, whatever shape that truth takes, that you will consider it a kind of gift, passed down from an old Amish grandmother who spent 38 years in silence and has decided finally that silence is not always the same thing as peace. I think, too, about Ruth Miller, a woman I never had the chance to meet, who passed from this world before I ever learned her name, and I want to say something to her here. Foolish as it may sound to speak to someone who cannot possibly hear me. I want to thank her. I want to thank her for a letter she wrote in 1950, 3 years before I was even born. A letter written out of the rawest kind of grief. The grief of learning she would never carry a child of her own. And I want to thank her for turning that grief, somehow, into an open hand held out toward whatever future might come, rather than letting it curdle into bitterness the way grief so often does. I want to thank her for the porch swing, for the yellow dress, for teaching my daughter to fish in a creek I have never seen with my own eyes, for staying up late helping with school projects, for every single ordinary act of love that filled the 38 years I was not permitted to be part of. I do not know if there is some way, in whatever comes after this life, for a message like that to actually reach a woman who has been gone for over 25 years. But I have decided, in my old age, that it costs nothing to speak it anyway. And that some words are worth saying even into what looks, from the outside, like empty silence. Because I have learned, more than almost anything else in this long story, that very little silence is ever truly empty. It is simply waiting for someone, someday, to finally break it open. I think about Walter Miller, too, a man whose burned hands I have only ever seen in an old photograph tucked among my father's letters. Hands that pulled a stranger from a burning barn without a single moment's hesitation. Hands that later held my newborn daughter for the very first time, though I did not know it then. Though I would not know it for 38 more years. I think about the particular kind of courage it takes to run toward a fire rather than away from it, and I have come to believe, turning this story over and over in my mind these past few years, that this same particular courage showed up again and again throughout this entire long story, in different shapes, in different people, at different moments. It showed up when Walter ran into those flames. It showed up when Ruth wrote that letter, laying her own private grief bare to a young Amish farmer she barely knew. It showed up, I think, even in my father's flawed and painful decision, however much harm it caused me. Because he was trying, in his own limited way, to run toward a fire of his own. The fire of an old debt he could not otherwise repay. And it showed up in me, finally, at 71 years old, sitting alone in a workshop with a bundle of letters in my lap, when I decided that I would rather walk toward this particular fire, whatever it might reveal, whatever pain it might reopen, than spend whatever years I have left pretending I had never found it at all. I also want to say a word to my own children, the ones who grew up alongside this secret without ever knowing it was there, sharing a home with a mother who carried a grief none of them could see. I have told each of them, in my own private conversations with them since all of this came to light, that the years I spent raising them were never diminished by the daughter I was raising in my heart at the very same time. I want to say it here too, in case any of them ever watch this video, though I suspect most of them will simply hear about it secondhand, the way news travels through our community even now. Every single one of you was loved completely, entirely, without any portion of my heart withheld on account of the daughter I lost. I have come to believe, watching Grace and my other children slowly build their own relationships with each other over these past few years, that love is not something that runs out when you give more of it away. It is something that simply grows larger, making room for one more chair at the table, one more name in the family Bible, one more voice added to the chorus of grandchildren who fill our farmhouse every Christmas now. Grace's grandchildren included, sitting alongside cousins they never knew existed, until an old woman finally found the courage to open a cedar chest and read what was hidden at the bottom of it. Before I go, I want to ask you once more for the same things I asked at the very beginning of this video, because I meant them then, and I mean them even more now, having told you this whole long story. If this touched you even a little, please take a moment to press that like button. because it truly does help other people find stories like mine. Stories that I believe deserve to be heard, even when they are difficult. Even when they do not paint every single person and every single community in the most flattering possible light. If you would like to hear more from an old woman with more stories still left to tell, please subscribe, because I am not finished yet, and I would be glad to have you along for whatever comes next. And please, before you close this video, leave a comment and tell me where in this wide and wonderful world you are watching from. I have spent my entire life within the boundaries of a few small counties in Pennsylvania and Ohio, and it would mean more to me than you can possibly know to sit here in my kitchen, reading comments from places I will likely never see with my own eyes in this lifetime. And to know that this story, my story, Grace's story, my father's story, and even Walter and Ruth Miller's story, found its way, in the end, to every corner of this earth. Thank you for sitting with me through all of this. Thank you for listening to an old woman tell the truth at last. And I will see you, God willing, in the next story.